order placed to sell short Japanese yen at 104,360. I'm placing an order to sell short Japanese yen at 104,360.
That won't be easy.
But unless there is some basis for some cooperative action, the world will slide into a catastrophe.
But what I do believe both sides are capable of through the highest level diplomacy at an early stage of the Biden administration is to define the parameters.
We should build an open world economy that works for all. We must firmly safeguard the multilateral trading system under the WTO and unequivocally reject unilateralism and protectionism.
When your economy becomes so big and your interests are all over the world, you have to protect your own interests.
The American administration is about to change, but the clock will not simply be rewound.
I hope that he will be able to focus his mind on developing a framework for an overall constructive relationship with China, because the last 4 years have been quite a tumultuous ride.
Unfortunately, some forces are acting against the trend of the times. They have trumpeted the decoupling and willfully walked away from international commitments, posing challenges to multilateralism.
I don't think we're going into a world of deep protectionism going forward. I see more regionalism.
Some of the top business and political leaders speaking on the future of the U.S.-China relations at the Bloomberg New Economy Forum. Now, later today, also at the Bloomberg New Economy Forum, we speak with the ECB President, Christine Lagarde. That's at 4 p.m. in London. That's 11 a.m. in New York. And certainly the ECB having many challenges on how to recalibrate monetary stimulus after the second wave of the pandemic. Let's get back to Stephanie Flanders, Bloomberg Senior Executive Editor for Economics. He's still with us. Stephanie, thank you so much for staying with us. How does the ECB recalibrate given the challenges ahead?
I think that what they're looking at is how much they can, and what's interesting about what we've heard from Christine Lagarde recently is a sort of rejection of the idea that their existing approach needs to be completely retooled. She would argue that there is scope for them to continue to use all the instruments, including the new instrument for bond purchases that they've introduced this year. A little bit of skepticism about that, given the scale of the challenge, where you look at where the inflation forecasts are now, where they're expected to be, even if the Eurozone bounces back from this second wave of shutdowns, as we hope and expect.
But, Stephanie, if you look at the vaccine, will it come too late to actually, support the economy? How much more damage can we see on a lot of these European economies? And is there anything more, apart from cheap credit, than the ECB can do?
I think they are going to have to think again about, or at least continue the conversation around fiscal support. We do have the recovery. I mean, one thing that's good about the timing is that it's been sort of very fast by EU standards, but still not actually getting the money out of the door yet, that 750 billion euro recovery fund. For some of the key economies, some of the worst affected economies, particularly in the fringes of the Eurozone, that is going to be a big boost as a share of GDP if they can get the money out of the door into those projects. So I think that the focus will shift there and on what they're spending the money on. Are they putting it into things that will support growth, not just hold the economy together or hold it in standstill? And I think otherwise, governments are going to continue to be under pressure to keep up these sort of job support programs. But with any luck, we will see a bounce back at the end of the year from the lifting of restrictions. Most countries look like they are on course to have at least a partial lifting.
Stephanie, it is 15 years on. I can't believe I'm saying that. 15 years on from Dooley, Folkerts, Landau, and Garber's seminal paper on international adjustment. They didn't write that paper at the negative bound. How does Lagarde, how does Europe adjust with negative interest rates? I don't see it in the textbooks, and I don't see it applied. How do they do that?
Well, partly through the fiscal, and that's why the recovery plan is so significant. If we end up with a form of risk sharing a form of fiscal policy, if you like, European fiscal policy. We're going to have European EU-funded bonds to support part of that plan. Then we start to see a capacity to adjust. I mean, you're right. There isn't the countries by themselves, without control of their own currencies, are going to struggle to come up with enough impetus, enough impulse. But with the support of that plan, well, maybe you can chart a course. But it doesn't suggest that the ECB is going to be able to start moving back to normal anytime soon.
Yeah. Stephanie, given where
Short position open on Japanese yen at 104.360.
2021, we'll see negative rates in the UK.
You know, we've had a little bit of pushback from the Bank of England just over the last few weeks. I mean, they would claim that they have done their duty in doing the due diligence of going through what is, I think, they're still in the process of doing their market review. They don't think about whether or not they can do what the implications for markets and for financial institutions would be for negative rates. I don't sense it's on the near horizon. They've known about the adjustment to the non-transition era Brexit, the kind of proper Brexit in January, for a long time. We know that's going to be a jolt. Even with a deal, we know there's going to be a big jolt because it's a big change in trading conditions. I don't see it in the very near term, but it is clearly part of the toolbox if you're looking further ahead, if they really struggle to pull the UK out of this.
Stephanie, thank you so much. Stephanie Flanders, our Bloomberg Senior Executive Editor for Economics, joining us this morning. Now, also join us a little bit later for more of the Bloomberg New Economy Forum. We have great guests, including the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi, Banco Santander Chair Anna Botin, Ray Dalio of Bridgewater, and you can watch all of that live on Bloomberg.com, on the Bloomberg Terminal, or of course Bloomberg New Economy's social channels on Twitter and Facebook. This is Bloomberg.
This is Bloomberg Best, your weekly review of the most important business news, analysis, and interviews from Bloomberg Television around the world.
Ken Burns, welcome to Bloomberg Big Decisions.
We have always been a mixture of things. We are always stronger for that mixture.
Growth is a way to stay competitive, delight more and more consumers.
Welcome to the Best of Bloomberg Technology. I'm Emily Chang.
They move the needle by acknowledging that they have to monitor the content.
What is one word of advice you'll take with you?
Learn how to listen. And that is certainly something that has served me well.
Ankiti, where do you go from here?
It's a huge market. It's a huge opportunity. I want to go 100x from here.
Our philosophy is to partner where we can and stand apart when we should.
Market that over the past few weeks has made it clear it wants to go higher. It got a little spooked by the idea that geopolitical tensions are rising.
what is very important with today's news is we can now, for up to 30 days, have a vaccine stored in a regular fridge at 2 to 8 Celsius, like you do insulin. And as you know, every pharmacy, doctor's office, hospital has that capability. So we think it's a very important game changer. The other piece too, to keep in mind is our vaccine does not require dilution.
And the joy of vaccines. Yesterday, a conversation with its chief executive officer of Moderna. What we know is, well, there's 2 vaccines out there, many more to come. We need to step away from the vaccine frenzy, what it's clearly done to the markets, and speak with Dr. Fazeli right now of Bloomberg Intelligence, just wonderful on pharmaceuticals, the pharmacology that we're looking at. Sam Fazeli, I want to move away from Moderna and Pfizer to the other kinds of vaccines. From where you sit, is it the land of messenger RNA and this new science, or can more traditional vaccines be part of the game forward?
Good morning, Tom. Well, yes, they can. At the end of the day, we need to see how these vaccines all behave over the longer term. And we won't have enough doses from Pfizer and Moderna. At max, we'll have about 2 billion doses by the end of next year. So that falls far short of what's needed globally. So we do need other vaccines. Also, in case the longevity or the durability of these other vaccines, or the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines, aren't as good as what we would hope to see, and perhaps other vaccines are needed to come and boost that up.
How close are we to those other vaccines? Are we going to see spectacular joy and announcements, or is it a long slog ahead within traditional adenovirus and other vaccines?
Yeah, so the adenoviruses from AstraZeneca and Johnson & Johnson, I just put out a note this morning saying that I'm a bit worried about the Astra trial data that we're expecting by the end of this year from the UK and Brazilian trials. The US trials just kicked off, so has Johnson & Johnson. So that data will be in the first quarter, but of course the infection rate's so high that we might get that a bit earlier than we would have done before. And then beyond that, we'll get the more traditional vaccine data. So there's still more to come, but obviously Pfizer and Moderna have set up a pretty high bar.
So Pfizer and Moderna, Sam, I mean, if you have 2 vaccines that have such, great trial data, is it quicker to distribute? How are these 2 vaccines actually different?
Well, they are actually a lot more similar than different. They use very similar technology. That the piece of RNA that they use is pretty similar. So, and the fact that one needs a slightly lower temperature to be kept at is probably because they haven't studied it as far as long, and over time that might evolve. So we just have to wait and see how they differ in the longer term in terms of their durability or any other details, such as which one's better for older people, etc. But I'm going to assume until we see something different that they are going to be pretty much the same.
Sam, what are some of the questions that you still want to know about these vaccines? If you look at the markets, they're very optimistic that we go back to normal, maybe early to mid 2021. Having a vaccine, what are the questions that we don't know? Can you still pass the infection even if you take the vaccine yourself? What are the other things that we should be thinking about?
Yeah, Francine, the list is a bit too long for a short TV hit, but you've just hit on one crucial one that you've just mentioned, and that is, if you're vaccinated and you don't get symptoms, are you still infectious? That's something that has to be worked out, and unfortunately, I don't think the trials as they are today from Pfizer and Moderna are designed to answer that question in detail, so someone else needs to study that. And then, of course, is how long does immunity last? If I take my jab today, am I good to go for the next 1 year, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years?
We learned the complexity of this from Sam Fazeli. Sam, just treasure. Thank you so much with Bloomberg Intelligence this morning. Futures negative 16, red and green on the screen. A little bit of a lift to the NASDAQ right now. The VIX shapes up, coming in from a 24 level to 23.10 with a 22 handle yesterday, showing the good markets. Let me give you the level on the Dow futures, 29,768, a real dash to 30,000. Yeah, we're on the 30,000 watch, I'll admit it. Bonds come in a basis point, really not much action there, 0.89%. Curve flattening. The real yield, well, negative 0.86. percent there. We'll have to watch that carefully. Sterling, we're watching, of course, off that Brexit headline. Francine Lacroix mentioned 1.3243 as well. On the application of central bank theory to fiscal markets and also to the interest rate market, Christopher Rupke will join us with MUFG. It'll be a good time to catch up with him. Stay with us. From London, from New York, this is Bloomberg.
It's such an interesting new world.
The world is changing.
For us, it's not about being first. It's about being the best.
While everyone is zigging, we're zagging.
We feel like we can maybe help people out more.
We have an enormous number of big ideas.
We've been shouting from the rooftops for a very long time. There is a monopoly problem in this country, and in particular, there is a Google problem in this country.
This morning, there is no room at the hospital. The constraint is not cases or deaths. The constraint is exhausted nurses and doctors. Sweden will make a, quote, unprecedented response. Philadelphia is closing high schools. Iowa will limit gatherings, spiritual gatherings accepted. Markets, they're spared at Dow 30,000. It is in sight. Pacific Rim currency strengthened. And Donald Trump is his own Secretary of Offense and Secretary of Defense. He wants to, quote, strike Iran and withdraw troops from Afghanistan, Iraq, and Somalia. Good morning, everyone. Bloomberg Surveillance from New York, from London. Tom Keene and Francine Lacroix. So much to talk about as well. The news flow at this moment is really quite extraordinary. We're expecting Home Depot earnings. I see same-store sales for Home Depot up a pandemic number, 24.6%. I don't believe that number. We'll have to see if that's true. It's truly an unbelievable number. And Francine, these are seismic announcements from Amazon where they dive into the competitive field of how we get our pharmaceutical drugs.
Right, Tom. So this is what I'm seeing. This literally breaking out moments ago. Amazon is expanding its push into healthcare with this online pharmacy. We understand that Prime customers will be offered fast delivery and discounts for medicines. And this is a new digital drugstore that could come after the acquisition of PillPack in 2018. This could be huge news, Tom, given the fact that Amazon is so big and has so many strides that, the fact that it's pushing into selling prescription drugs is launching a digital pharmacy could be a real game changer for healthcare.
Yeah, as well. Now, we've got this story. We're going to drive this forward, and this is a huge announcement, widely anticipated on the street. Within the blur that I saw from Amazon, I would suggest, folks, the key thing is non-medical. It'll be interesting to see the cash discounts they will have to compete with Walgreens, CVS, and everyone else out there. That's a seismic announcement on pharmacology from Amazon. And meanwhile, on Home Depot, obviously a bellwether for the American economy, and the same store sales say it all. A nice outreach there. Tanya, give me the stock price if you can on Home Depot pre-market. It may be too early in the morning really to get that as well. Average ticket up 10% is all you need to know. That's a key metric for Home Depot. Francine, I'm influenced by Home Depot being directly below me. I think I'm just above tools, power tools here at our 731 Lexington studios. But Home Depot, Francine, says so much about the pandemic.
Yeah, it does. And we saw a similar trend here in the UK. I mean,
I'm moving my stop on profit for Japanese yen to 104.310. Okay.
all the people that are at home, Tom, and I know I'm in London, but I can really hear it around me as so many people doing improvements to their home because it's more convenient and we spend so much time more, at home and indoors. But that figure from Home Depot, third quarter comparable sales up 24.1%.
Yeah, the shoe extension to Francine Lacroix, that construction that we heard an hour ago, all of that backed by Home Depot.
I wish, Tom.
Francine, I really want to point this out because I think it's so important, folks. Apple, Amazon, Apple, tech, and all that. Home Depot, 10-year track record, up 27.3% per year. And that's a lot of sexy response from selling construction equipment and power tools. Home Depot out, and we'll continue to follow that story and the Amazon story as well. What a news day with our first word news in New York City is Ritika Gupta.
Morning, Tom. Francine. The Trump campaign is withdrawing a key part of its lawsuit against the election result in Pennsylvania. It's abandoning demands that almost 700,000 mail-in ballots be thrown out because observers were kept too far away from the count. The challenge is now against a far smaller number of ballots, almost certainly just a fraction of Biden's lead in the state. President-elect Joe Biden is starting to meet national security experts, but his transition team is still being denied access to government officials in key departments. To prepare for office, he's relying on experts from the Obama era and people who've left government during Trump's term. In Germany, Chancellor Angela Merkel has failed to push through a state of tougher restrictions to tackle the pandemic. She's postponing major decisions until next week after being unable to reach a deal with regional leaders. Instead, she's urging people to limit public and private gatherings. And 4 astronauts have arrived on the International Space Station after a 27-hour voyage on the SpaceX Dragon capsule. They'll now begin their 6-month scientific mission aboard the orbiting lab. It's the first time in NASA's history that a full crew has been ferried to the space station on a commercial vessel. Global News 24 hours a day on air and at Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Ritika Gupta. This is Bloomberg. Tom?
Ritika, thanks so much. Short data check here. We've got to get to Kevin Cirilli. Futures red and green on the screen. I'm looking at Pacific Rim currencies stronger today. The VIX, 23.08. Francine?
Yeah, Tom, overall, look, a global stock rally powered by hopes of a vaccine is just taking a pause, and then pound here in the UK gaining on signs that Brexit negotiators are nearing a breakthrough.
Very good. As part of our New Economy Forum, it is always good to speak to former presidents. Here, William Jefferson Clinton.
We shouldn't accept
or assume that it's all going to be bad without working to make it better. We got to try to, we got to give the new administration a chance to articulate an approach and then try to achieve, in cooperation with Europe and the United States and the international bodies. Bill Clinton, always a pragmatic person. We learned that over his very successful presidency over 2 terms. Kevin Cirilli joins us now, the pragmatic one from Pennsylvania. Kevin, I want to take your Pennsylvania knowledge and fold it into where we are right now, which is Speaker Pelosi and the gentleman from the 2nd Congressional District, Mr. Boyle, who we will speak to on surveillance today, in middle-of-the-road Democrats dealing with the liberal left, as they would say on Fox. How petrified is Speaker Pelosi, and for that matter, Congressman Boyle, of losing the House?
You know, over the next 2 years, I think that there's definitely this baked-in optimism amongst Republicans that I speak with, Tom, about that they are on the cusp, from their point of view, of a resurgence of sorts in the 2022 midterms. I can tell you that people like Congressman Brendan Boyle, as well as other more moderate progressives in the House of Representatives and suburbs all around the country, feel that they have been really muted on their microphone as a result of a lack of digital advocacy in their wheelhouse. And they feel that the reason they've been able to make gains in the past several years previously in the House of Representatives is because they ran as more moderates, because the AOC model wouldn't work in the suburbs of major cities. That's just what they believe. And so it will be fascinating to see whether or not that tension is going to still be on display. But President-elect Joe Biden has made clear, based upon the names on his transition landing teams, for example, that he is much more looking for a pragmatic approach in some of the more stabilized departments like Treasury, for example.
No, obviously a vice president sings from the same hymnal as a president. I mean, that's what you do when you're in Washington. How close is Senator Harris to the congressman from the 2nd District versus the left? You know, I mean, Fox and the rest of them will say defund the police is the hot button, but there's a lot of other hot buttons. Where does Senator Harris as vice president fit into that mix?
More progressive. And when I talk to sources, especially moderates in the Democratic Party, what they are telling me is that they fully expect her to be the more progressive avenue, so to speak, for many of the policy prescriptions and proposals that she's going to have to navigate and that she's going to have to look at. It will be very interesting to see who becomes the negotiator-in-chief, so to speak, on Capitol Hill, because President-elect Joe Biden does have deep relationships with older members of Congress, especially, obviously, in the Senate. Look no further than Leader McConnell. But Vice President-elect Kamala Harris has relationships with the younger, more newer members of the Senate and of Congress. And so how they're able to navigate that and who will be negotiating, for example, the stimulus push or infrastructure push that they're going to be following through, that's the first thing on my radar for the first 100 days.
Kevin, you know, when will President Trump concede? Are people in the States concerned about when he'll concede, or does it actually make not that much difference?
Well, the markets haven't blinked upon the various developments, the legalities within Pennsylvania, another withdrawal of some of the lawsuit. Look, I think that here in Washington, D.C., Republicans that I speak with are rolling their eyes at best. And in other times just shrugging their shoulders. But they do view it as a potential political asset in terms of strategy, Francine, for politics, especially ahead of the runoff elections in Georgia in the first week of January. So it's getting a reaction, but it's not viewed as a hindrance, so to speak, on folks being able to go about their work in this lame duck session.
So the transition, Kevin, will be put in place. I mean, we were discussing yesterday with Tom whether, you know, at some point there'll have to be legal challenges to force the transition from the Republican side to go into place. Is that slowly becoming easier to manage?
Here's what I'll say. I talked to sources last week at the State Department, and I asked them about this notion of the transition. As is typical every go-around, staffers prepare binders, transition binders for their predecessors. And so it can be utilized for both individuals who are going to take their job if there is a second term, but also obviously the handoff for other individuals if it's a new administration. That work typically takes months and it started at the end of the summer, and that is precisely what members at the State Department have already begun preparing. And so in that regard, they're on track for that. I think the pomp and circumstance of a public transition, which is a staple and a historic, sobering tradition in the United States, that's where there's the biggest question mark at this point.
Kevin Cirilli, thank you so much. Our Chief Washington correspondent. We've got much more coming up here. Of course, the news from Amazon as they dive into a widely anticipated pharmacy, maybe a drugstore, by mail, by cardboard box as well. Home Depot out with earnings. On the central bank story on monetary theory, Alan Blinder will join us at Princeton, the former vice chairman of the Federal Reserve System. Red and green on the screen. Futures at -20. This is Bloomberg. Good morning.
Better than expected, not only in terms of job creation, but also a sharp fall in the unemployment rate consistent with higher labor force participation. That's really good news.
Overall, the gain was solid, but even while this is a very robust pace of job gains, it's a lot slower than it has been in the summer months.
Great that we saw the job gains we did, but they still are diminished from what they were, of course, back in April and May. And the scarring, the sort of wounds that were created by COVID are beginning to fester.
I would caution people to look at the top line number because I don't think it tells the entire story. Employment relative to population is still well below where we were pre-crisis, and that's because I think that we're going to have some lasting damage.
Depending on what you look at, jobs creation or the unemployment rate, you have different views as to whether the improvement in the labor force is keeping up or slowing down.
Give you a sense of the real-time action, the 10-year yield tumbling now 11 basis points, so continuing in this knee-jerk risk-off feel.
The notion that the Fed can do all that is required at this point to support the economy is just wrong. And the Fed is really pleading for fiscal relief. I believe it's essential.
My favorite panel that we've seen.
I'm moving 5 profit, stop on profit for Japanese yen to 104.260. Okay.
Into the equations and look at the dynamics. And the dynamic is the desire and the demand of investment just isn't there. What have you learned?
Yeah, it's, well, we were kind of worried about this, right? I mean, theoretically, if companies are missing a few months of sales revenue, how are they going to go out and be anxious to buy new equipment for the future. So at the moment, what's happening is that they are making some investment, but they're not really spending on structures. They're not spending on new factories. They're not spending on office space, not as much warehouses, and especially they're not doing oil and gas drilling structures.
The textbooks tell us that the greatest variability in a slowdown comes from the investment side. Great. What have you gleaned from a natural medical disaster? Is it the same as a recession, or is the investment dynamic, the negative aspects of it, is it different in a pandemic?
Yeah, it's very interesting. It is fair, I think, to call this a pandemic recession. We're going to get industrial production later today, which kind of defines the business cycle for over a century. And it fell for 2 months, and then it hit bottom. So the recession should have been over in April and May, theoretically, based on this number. So it's very much COVID-based, and I'm going to be very interested to see retail sales today. It's October. I'd rather see November data, but October data for retail sales, we want to see if this second wave of the virus spreading, is that going to bring down actual spending on the part of consumers?
Chris, good morning from London. If we do have a vaccine that's workable and distributed to enough people globally by, let's say, the end of the first quarter of 2021, how much does that limit scarring to the economy?
I think, usually we use, I just heard Janet Yellen in the background on your program. And the scarring tends to be, and she's brought this up before, the scarring is that the job losses become more permanent. People are out of the labor force. Their skills grow rusty. Now, people have just lost their jobs in the last handful of months here, so I don't think they're losing their skills right now. But, yeah, it would be important if the virus can give people confidence so that the social distancing measures can be dropped and we can go back to normal. I'm still hopeful. I'm going to be back in New York City in my office this time next year.
But how will, what are the changes that will remain post-COVID? Like, are we underestimating? There seems to be an assumption that we go back to what it was like at the end of 2019. What changes?
Yeah, I think, the airlines are a good measure of this, and they're saying business travel, for instance, our people travel all over the country, I do as well, that business travel is not going to be coming back as quickly. I don't know if I buy that. The only thing that kind of worries me here is that, stock market valuations are very high, 28.4 for the PE ratio of the S&P. I'm worried that people bought these 5 stocks that are 20% of the S&P. The reason they bought the 5 stocks, Alphabet, Amazon, Apple, Microsoft, Facebook, is that we were going to be at a stay-at-home economy. Well, what if we're not going to be at a stay-at-home economy this time next year? Just something isn't adding up here in terms of the stock market's lofty valuation.
Chris, just very quickly, we heard this morning that Amazon was going into the pharmaceutical world. Does that not put a lot of the pharmaceutical infrastructure at risk? Are we underestimating some of these big shifts to technology?
Yeah, that was very interesting. I don't know. Again, we're going to see internet sales, so-called, as part of retail sales coming out this morning. I think can the traditional means of, buying commodities, consumer buying goods, is that going to change due to these new companies? I think it's a little bit slower than you think here. I was just looking back at internet sales as a percentage of retail sales were 13% a year ago. Now they're 15.3%. It's only made 2 percentage point inroad here. Maybe it's going to be slower than we think. There'll be other natural barriers to stop this disruption, if you will.
Chris, thanks so much. Chris Rubke there, MUFG Union Bank Chief Financial Economist. Now, coming up, we'll have plenty more on central banks and scarring with, of course, Christine Lagarde, an exclusive conversation for the Bloomberg New Economy Forum. That's at 11 a.m. in New York. That's 4 p.m. in London. You can watch it live on Bloomberg, but also Bloomberg.com. This is Bloomberg.
When you went to Baltimore, you went initially to be an
anchor woman,
and then didn't quite work out.
Yeah, I got fired.
Well, you got
demoted. I was
got demoted, but they didn't. They had a contract, so they didn't say goodbye.
Yeah.
And then, how did you work out to be on a afternoon show where you actually got to be an interviewer? How did that actually happen?
Well, what happened was this is what I now know with age and perspective, that many times getting demoted is an opportunity for something else to show up, or getting fired. You know, lots of people I've interviewed over the years who have these stories about the best thing that ever happened to you. It puts you in the next best place. I was not a good television reporter. I was too emotional. I was making $22,000 a year, and my best friend Gail, who I met there at the time, she was also working there. She said, "Oh my God, you're 22, making $22,000. Imagine when you're 25." Then you're 30, so I'd be making 60 about now. It'd be good, 62. Once I got demoted, they didn't want to pay out my contract. I was making $25,000 a year. They didn't want to pay me the $25,000, so they kept me on and said, "We'll put you on this talk show just to run out your contract."
Our generation's biggest problem.
Climate change is happening.
And the world's most innovative solutions.
Transport, industry, buildings, electricity, all of those things.
Everything you need to know about our changing environment, the politics of global warming.
We can and we will deal with climate change.
In the fight against climate change, Bloomberg Green has you covered.
I think what we're seeing during this period of time is that communicating via video is not a fad. We are using it in all aspects of our lives, for work, for learning, for communicating, for staying in touch.
Bloomberg Surveillance. Good morning, everyone. Francine Lacroix in London, Tom Keene in New York. Francine knows it is different in the United Kingdom. It is different worldwide. It is different in Canada. There is the American pharmaceutical system. I'm not expert at it. All I know, like you, we have to deal with it each and every day. Drew Armstrong is expert at it with Bloomberg News. He usually gets up at the crack of 9 a.m. We've dragged him out of bed this morning on this huge, widely anticipated announcement that Mr. Bezos and Amazon, after the PillPack acquisition, want to be America's drugstores. CVS down 5% on the announcement. Drew Armstrong, this has been widely anticipated. What happens day one for Mr. Bezos and Amazon?
Yeah, and as you point out, Tom, Amazon has been thinking about this for years and years, and at the same time, the major drugstore chains have been freaked out about it for years and years and years, and you've seen that reaction in their investors as well. Amazon has gone after every other part of the drugstore, and it always felt inevitable that they would go after the prescription counter in the back, and I think this makes that as final as it can be. Day one, I think you're going to start seeing how many people want to just go ahead and integrate their prescription drug shopping into, ordering stuff online in the U.S. like they have been doing, I think, in the middle of the pandemic in greater numbers than ever before. Doing this now, I suspect, will end up being a pretty savvy move by Amazon because, people are in the middle of more lockdowns. It's in the middle of people not wanting to leave their house. And if you ever had a reason to, one more reason to stay home and do stuff online that you don't have to go to a store for, especially if you're on, a lot of different drugs or something like that, and you might not want to be out around other people. This is it.
Okay, I totally agree with you, but to me, it's so much about price and the fury that older people have about drug costs in America. I just went in and signed up for this thing, folks, like everybody else is going to sign up. I had to I lied the entire way through, Drew. I said I was healthy and all that. Drew, the first thing Amazon wants to know is what state I'm in. Is it your understanding that this can be a national effort, or are they going to be blocked by selective states?
Yeah, I was just paging through to just see exactly where they're available. The reason that they're asking that is because to operate, you need, to be in the pharmacy business, you need a state pharmacy license. This is a state licensed business. And so, you have to actually have the ability to do that. The PillPack acquisition, as well as some of the efforts Amazon has taken subsequent to that, they've been going out and doing the state licensure process over the last several years. I think there have been a number of reports of them going out and making sure they're okay to operate. So it looks like they're available in just about everywhere. I haven't gone through every last state to check that. But, yes, this is going to be a business that I suspect a lot of people will pick. Price will matter, but they're also going to go after insured customers. I think it'll be interesting to see what happens with those folks who actually, need to go and speak to their pharmacist and like to go and speak to their pharmacist, and how they work around that. PillPack has done a lot of that business by phone, but there's people who like to be able to go and and visit with their pharmacist and see their pharmacist and talk to their pharmacist and check on their medication. Obviously, again, though, with the pandemic, I suspect a lot of that has been curtailed, and that is a moment of opportunity for Amazon.
Drew, the media was disrupted. If you look at hotels, it was disrupted. Travel was disrupted. The healthcare seems to be the last bastion of industry that has not been disrupted yet. Is this just the first wave of disruption for pharma and health companies?
I think it is going to be interesting to see whether this represents a broader entry into trying to shake things up in healthcare or an opportunity to pick around the edges. We've seen lots of people who have looked at opportunities to pick around the edges, but run into plenty of trouble when they try to disrupt healthcare more broadly. And, you can put Amazon into that second bucket as well. Remember, they had that effort with JP Morgan and with Berkshire that they were going to hire, a tool go on day and have Haven Health and start remaking health system. And it appears to have gone absolutely nowhere. It is very, very, very hard to truly disrupt healthcare in a meaningful sense once you get into the area of, hospitals, doctors, insurance plans, where a lot of the real money is. Drugs are a chunk, but they're, around 10, maybe 15%. So this may be just the case of something that this is the last retail. Think of this rather as the last retail item that they were going to go after than the first healthcare thing.
Drew, thank you so much. Drew Armstrong there, Bloomberg News senior editor for healthcare, joining us today on this big news on Amazon and pharmacies in the U.S. Now let's get straight to the Bloomberg First Word News. Here's Ritika Gupta. Hi, Ritika.
Thanks, Francine. President-elect Joe Biden says containing the coronavirus pandemic is vital to the economic recovery. He's vowing to spur a rebound in 2021, but also urging Congress to pass a stimulus bill this year to deliver immediate relief to Americans. Biden says it should be like the $2.2 trillion HEROES Act already passed by the House. The general outline of a future trade deal between the UK and the EU is clear to both sides. That's according to Ireland's Prime Minister. But he's warning it's not yet clear if his UK counterpart Boris Johnson truly wants an agreement. The UK says it wants to see realism on the part of the EU in the talks. Flexible working could be the solution for businesses struggling to recruit women into senior roles. That's according to a new study by Zurich Insurance. Women applying for management jobs jumped 20% after the insurer advertised the roles with part-time and job share options. As a result, the number of women hired for senior positions jumped by a third. And the strongest storm of hurricane season has hit Central America. It made landfall late Monday in Nicaragua, bringing catastrophic winds and torrential rain. Now 105 miles per hour, its winds are powerful enough to cause deadly mudslides and trigger a humanitarian crisis. Global news 24 hours a day on air and at Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Ritika Gupta. This is Bloomberg. Tom, Francine.
Ritika, thanks so much. As we spoke to Kevin Cirilli of Pennsylvania, our chief Washington correspondent, we got a nice briefing on the tension that's out there. Now, with any congressman, there's like 14 ways to go. But with Brendan Boyle, it is different. His father was immigrant from Ireland. He started out with the most basic of family upbringings in the Philadelphia area and has really made something of it. He is a gentleman from the 2nd District of Pennsylvania. We're thrilled that the moderate Boyle could join us this morning. Brendan Boyle, I want you to explain right now to our international audience the threat of the majority that Speaker Pelosi and you face by the left. How afraid are you that with action over the next 2 years, Congress could be tossed to the Republicans?
Yeah, well, thanks. It's good to join you even at this ungodly early hour.
Got that right.
I give you credit doing this every day. Let me say, I'm certainly not afraid. Look, I think that for any political party to reach a majority, to get to the magic number of 218, it's going to require a certain amount of ideological diversity. Certainly, I saw that when the Republicans were in the majority, and now we see it that we've been in the majority. I've served in both. And I will tell you that over the first 2 years of our majority, we didn't lose one vote on the House floor. So I think actually the last 2 years speak for themselves, are pretty good. Now, the one difference moving forward is obviously our majority is reduced. We're still in the majority, but it's a smaller number than it was 2 years ago. That said, though, I have previously served in the state legislature in a majority that was razor thin.
Yeah.
And one of the things that you saw is that there was a little bit more camaraderie and the idea that no person could be a free agent, that we all needed to stick together. So oddly enough, in some ways, when you have a very close majority, it actually does improve the solidarity and the teamwork as opposed to when you have some slack.
You're in Philadelphia, and I know, Congressman, you read Ed Rendell's, first Bible book of politics as well. In the trenches of Philadelphia politics, what happens every time somebody on the left says defund the police? Is that way overplayed by the media, or is that really harmful to Brendan Boyle and Connor Lamb moving Pennsylvania forward as a Democratic majority?
Yeah, so let's be clear. The reality is as you know, there are almost no Democratic elected officials who favor, quote unquote, defund the police or abolish the police. I will say that the Republican campaign to link us to that slogan had some effect in this past election. I mean, I represent and live in an area of Northeast Philadelphia that has about 5,000 Philadelphia police officers. Obviously, a slogan of abolish the police or defund the police doesn't exactly help us with them and their families. Now, was that the only factor at play in the election? No. Sometimes when you look at post-election analysis, people quickly attempt to find one magic bullet solution when, in reality, the answer to what happens in most campaigns tends to be complex.
Congressman, good morning. The fact that Donald Trump still hasn't conceded the election, what does that mean? Does it make it more sympathetic to the Democrats, or do actually, people in the U.S. believe President Trump?
No, I mean, let's be clear. Joe Biden at this point has won 5 million more votes. He's up by about 4 percentage points and 306 electoral college votes. Even if somehow magically the results changed in a couple states, even if it had changed in 3 states, Joe Biden would still be the president-elect of the United States. What it does show, though, is I'm actually not surprised. I mean, Donald Trump has thought every election of the last decade was fixed, including 2016, the election he won. So actually, it would have been a surprise had he conceded and just admitted that this election was legitimate.
Congressman, how do you, renew and rekindle with a lot of voters? So we found out today that Amazon was launching this pharmacy online in the U.S. Do you worry about big tech coming in and actually, closing down a lot of your stores in your state?
Yeah, I think this is a major systemic question that we have to face in our economy. And that is, especially during the pandemic, the big guys have gotten bigger. And the small guys on Main Street are either not open or permanently put out of business. And I think for all of us, just as consumers, we face this as well, because I use Amazon. It's easy, it's convenient. But then the reality is that Amazon has the power of monopoly. And moving forward, if they are in every business and have that monopoly power, what does that say about a free market, about our system? Do we really have one at that point if everything is controlled by Amazon? So I think that these are serious questions that we need to confront. And that certainly when it comes to antitrust, Washington, D.C. really needs to be more active.
Oh, Brendan, let me go there. I think it's important. And yes, it's not Philadelphia. It's maybe Western Pennsylvania over to Cleveland of long ago and fire away, think Ida Tarbell. But it is Standard Oil. I mean, that's basically what we're talking about is a Standard Oil model. Would you suggest that Mr. Biden as president will lead us toward a regulatory milieu that gets us to Standard Oil actions on stocks like Amazon, companies like Amazon?
Yeah, I wouldn't suggest it, but I think the Justice Department needs to take a firmer look at a number of these areas where the power of monopoly is growing. Ultimately, despite the convenience of an Amazon app, monopoly is not good for our free market. It's not good for consumers. And that is something that I think we need to take a less of a laissez-faire look at.
Brendan, what are you going to do about the Philadelphia Eagles? I got 10 seconds. What are you going to do about the Philadelphia Eagles? Fix it.
3-5-1 is a disgrace. Even more of a disgrace is that we are still in first place in the NFC East. I apologize to the rest of the nation for the state of the NFC East.
Very good. Your apologies accepted. Brendan Boyle, thank you so much. The 2nd Congressional District of Pennsylvania. Later today, driving the conversation forward, the Senator from Tennessee, Marsha Blackburn, with us. This is Bloomberg. Good morning.
This is Bloomberg Best, your weekly review of the most important business news, analysis, and interviews from Bloomberg Television around the world.
Ken Burns, welcome to Bloomberg Big Decisions.
We have always been a mixture of things. We are always stronger for that mixture.
Growth is a way to stay competitive, delight more and more consumers.
Welcome to the Best of Bloomberg Technology. I'm Emily Chang.
They move the needle by acknowledging that they have to monitor the content.
What is one word of advice you'll take with you?
Learn how to listen. And that is certainly something that has served me well.
Ankiti, where do you go from here? It's a huge market. It's a huge opportunity. I want to go 100x from here.
Our philosophy is to partner where we can and stand apart when we should.
Surveillance, really interesting show today. Lots of good conversation here across what we do, economics, all that investment stuff. The bigger picture as well, the congressman from Philadelphia that we spoke to, Mr. Boyle, moments ago. And now, while we dive into a research note, he is at Barings, where he is chief global strategist. Christopher Smart is acclaimed for thoughtful notes. He can take a cliche and make it smarter, and he does that with the idea of darker tunnel, and there's a brighter light out there. Christopher Smart joins us this morning. Christopher, thank you so much, and I thought the note was wonderful. Let me start with the darker tunnel. How dark is it?
We're learning every day it's getting darker in terms of the coronavirus cases we're seeing really across the country, in Europe as well. And more worrying from an economic point of view are the decisions that are being forced upon mayors and governors to go back to their playbook from March and April, restricting business activities, restricting movements, closing restaurants and stores, that sort of thing. That, I think, is something we weren't expecting about a month ago and makes the winter look that much more challenging.
Right.
And, we'll get a retail sales number later this morning, but what we really want to know is what the retail sales number is going to look like in December.
Our theme this morning, and with John Norman of J.P. Morgan as well, has been just on simple aggregate demand is not there. Can government institutions manage an increase in aggregate demand, or is it just about income replacement and substitution?
I think they can do both, and I think that's what we've seen in history, and that's what we saw actually earlier this year, where there was not just income replacement, but people who were at home without jobs were still spending, which was very helpful to keep the economy moving. And that's the big question mark, again, going into the winter, is not just the rising coronavirus cases, but when will a stimulus bill get through Congress? How large will it be? And how much damage will have been done by the time it gets out the door and into people's pockets?
Christopher, good morning. I'm jealous of your library. That's a good library you have behind you. When you look at some of the contradictory news that basically the markets have to digest, is now more difficult because it's contradictory news, but that really goes to what kind of recovery we'll see.
And I think that's the struggle that investors are facing right now. This near-term news is unexpectedly darker than we had thought about, as I say, a month ago. But what we're also getting right now is confirmation that the vaccines are coming. Not just the two that have been announced, but others will be on the way. Their effectiveness is higher than expected. There is a distribution plan coming into view. It's not going to be all at once, and there'll be some bumps along the way, clearly. But there is a sense that there is a bright light on the other end of the tunnel. We're just still not clear how dark the tunnel is going to be between now and when we get there.
Yeah, what happens to treasuries in the meantime?
Well, you're seeing the markets kind of play out that bifurcation, right? The stock market is pricing in the light, and as usual, the Treasury market is more concerned with the darkness between now and then. And I should say, once we even get through to the other side, we're going to be a global economy that has been scarred by this experience. There will be, weaker balance sheets, a labor market that is.
I closed position on Japanese yen. 104.260. Will
be behind us, but we'll still be facing all of those slow growth issues that we had coming into the pandemic.
Christopher, the heart of this is we will manage the method and we will struggle. The institutions, the elites will struggle. The haves will struggle to have smooth reaction functions. And then there's China. How does China play into this? Do they want us to have smooth reaction functions, or are they going to go their own way? And do we look for instabilities because of China?
I think China, at a base level, wants to see the global economy grow because that benefits the Chinese economy. And so I think they're probably rooting for us to succeed and get out of this pandemic as quickly as possible. Having said that, the relationship between the U.S. and China has been deteriorating for several years now. It's not just Donald Trump. It's not just trade. There are issues across the board around North Korea, around Taiwan, around Hong Kong that are going to make the relationship much more complicated going forward. And I think that is going to, at some point, come back into what markets are going to be looking at. Not right away.